Well, I guess at least this way you don't have to watch commercials. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's going to give you a quick overview about what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. Essentially, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And we're doing that today with our Horror Movie Supplement, where we're looking at an additional 100 subgenres to the original 100 subgenres we looked at on the Horror Movie Syllabus. And these tend to be a little bit more niche, a little bit more specific and less mainstream in terms of concept for the subgenre, but it's mostly just to have a good time, to have fun, and talk about some more movies because we're having such a good time talking about these stuff with you. So the subgenre we're looking at today is TV adaptations. And what I mean by that are movies that are based on or adapting a horror TV show that previously existed. Now, we did do a video back in the day about the best horror TV shows, like my favorite horror TV shows, basically. And we made a list of them. And most of the shows or most of the movies that we're talking about today do not relate to the shows that we talked about on that list. So, letting you know right off the bat, what we're talking about here is a mixed bag of movies, frankly. Some good movies, some really not so good movies, frankly, that are kind of notorious for not being so good. And so this is going to be a strange video because not everything is a glowing recommendation. And that's partly because we did talk about some of the best examples of horror TV adaptations already on the syllabus. We talked about Twilight Zone already. We talked about Tales from the Crypt, and so we're not going to repeat talking about those movies that we've talked about already. Just we don't do that here. So we're looking at new movies that we haven't talked about before. And then there's movies that we could look at, like things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I think we did look at that actually. But that's actually not a adaptation of a TV show that existed. That was a TV show that ended up being based on a movie, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that came out. And we've talked about a lot of movies that got adapted into TV shows subsequently. So that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the opposite, where the TV show existed first, and then they made it into a movie. And that was something of a trend in the last, say, 20 years, 25 years ago, something like that. There was a lot of these movies, not just in horror, but a lot of TV shows being mined from material to make movies, mostly to its detriment. So that's why I say not everything we're talking about today is going to be gold. It's not all going to be amazing, and so be it. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not fun, or at least not worth talking about. At least that's what I'm hoping for, because I have things to say, as I tend to do. And so I have arranged 3 movies that I definitely think are worth talking about, if not necessarily always worth seeing. And we're going to dig into those, and we're going to organize them as I always do: undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate. And in this case, I'm just going to make it simple. I'm going to make them in the order of how much I like them, because yeah, I don't like everything on this list. Like I said, I don't like everything, but I do want to talk about it. So let's go ahead and talk about it. The first TV adaptation we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows came out in 2012 and was directed by Tim Burton, who we've talked about on the channel a couple times before. He's famous for have directed Beetlejuice and Batman, and he did Sleepy Hollow, which we talked about. And he has a certain aesthetic, a certain style to him that is fairly popular, and it's still popular right now with the Wednesday TV show that's going on. And so he is a certain brand, a certain auteur, if you will. And this is a movie of his that does dovetail into that whole Tim Burton-esque thing, but it's supposed to be based on a 1960s soap opera of the same name that was very gothic and romantic, and it was not necessarily a match made in heaven, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a man named Barnabas Collins who gets cursed by a spurned witch into becoming a vampire and gets buried alive, frankly, because he's undead now. And then he gets dug up 200 years later, and it's now the 1970s, and he is trying to acclimate to this new century and his ancestors, his family that have changed quite a bit, and he's still pursued by this witch who has a vendetta against him, and of course, hijinks abound as they tend to do. We'll stop there, but I don't want to spoil it, but the movie, it's a little too much hijinks, frankly. This is probably my biggest issue with this movie that I do not love. And the reason why is because I love the TV show. I'm a fan of the TV show. I've talked about it before on the channel. I've talked about it probably multiple times on the channel. I love it. The idea of a soap opera that is, based on, these mysterious kind of supernatural events and ultimately a vampire who is, trying to kind of get back his humanity and stuff like that. It's a fascinating thing. It's a precursor for so many things that we have later on, but for the Vampire Slayer, Vampire Diaries, things like that. It really is kind of a blueprint for that kind of concept. And it's campy because it's dated. It's not campy intentionally. And this movie is campy intentionally, and it's a problem for me. This is a thing that was, again, happening around this time where they would take properties, movies that are TV shows that existed at the time, and then make movies out of them. But a lot of times they would try to do it kind of tongue in cheek, things like Starsky and Hutch or the Brady Bunch, where they were earnest in their incarnations as TV shows, and they were trying to like lampoon it by like, look how silly and campy this is in the movies. And I don't like that, especially if it's a movie, or excuse me, if it's a TV show that I actually liked, like Starsky and Hutch. I liked Starsky and Hutch as a kid. The movie was terrible because they're just trying to make fun of the thing I liked, and I couldn't get behind that. And generally speaking, I'm turned off by the parody versions of TV shows. The one notable exception being 21 Jump Street. Maybe we'll talk about that one day, even though it's not horror, but 21 Jump Street movie I actually thought was funny. But most of these movies that try to just lampoon the datedness or the campiness of a show because it's dated, it doesn't ring for me. It doesn't scratch the itch for me. And this is maybe the most egregious one of that because of my affection for the show. And not for nothing, I did have some expectations going into this because it was Tim Burton. It starred Johnny Depp as Barnabas Collins, who is an iconic character, an iconic vampire character. And so I was like, okay, I'm down for this because I like Johnny Depp. I like Tim Burton. I wanted to see what they're going to do. And supposedly Johnny Depp was a big fan of the original series. So like, oh, they're gonna be faithful to it. They're gonna do it right. No, they didn't do that. They really wanted to focus on this fish out of water aspect of it and mine a lot of comedy for it. And Johnny Depp is an actor that I used to love. I used to be really into him, and I'm not so much into him now. Not setting aside the whole personal stuff that he's dealt with in his private life, the performances have taken a toll ever since Pirates of the Caribbean, because he got a nomination for that performance, deservedly so. It was a great performance as Captain Jack Sparrow, but it felt like after that he wanted to play every character as somewhat goofy and strange and otherworldly and bizarre, from Willy Wonka to Lone Ranger, where he played Tonto. Like everything he was doing was kind of a variation of a theme, and it got monotonous and uninteresting and not really fascinating at all. And this is another example of this. The Barnabas Collins that he is playing is not the Barnabas Collins from the show. It's just not. He's not suave or menacing or interesting. He's just goofy. He spends most of the runtime of the movie making jokes about being in the 1970s, and not for nothing. I don't know why the movie is set in the 1970s, because the show was set in the 1960s when it came out. So I don't know why they moved it to the 70s other than just make jokes. I don't know, but the movie is frustrating because, again, Tim Burton behind the camera, Johnny Depp in the lead, and then it's got a supporting cast that is actually outstanding. You've got Eva Green as the witch. You've got, as the Collins family, you've got Michelle Pfeiffer and Johnny Lee Miller and Chloe Grace Moretz, and you've got Helena Bonham Carter, of course, because it's a Tim Burton movie. It's a strong cast that they're doing nothing with. They're really doing nothing with. And the movie it's just, it doesn't know what it wants to be. It's got too many plots going on in the movie. It's just convoluted with just a lot of different plots. It's like they're trying to squeeze in like years worth of episodes worth of television into one movie, and it's just a mess. By the way, I just saw Beetlejuice recently, and I felt the same way about that. Just too many plots going on at the same time. Streamline that a little bit, make it a little cleaner. That would have worked there, and it would have worked here. Like, again, I don't like parody movies, so that's kind of my own personal bias, but even with the parody movie aspect of it, there's just too much going on. There's too much plot. There's too many characters that are getting short shrift, and they're not really sure why they're there, other than the fact that they were in the show, so they had to be in the movie. And so it's frustrating. I like the show so much, and I had such high hopes for the movie. I went with my mother to see this movie because she loved the show as a kid, and it's something we had bonded over because I love the show more as an adult because I didn't, I was not born in the '60s, and so it was a kind of a bonding thing for us to over the show and talk about the show. So when the movie came out, we were excited. We went together, and she hated it too. She just was so disappointed. She says, "This is not the show. It's not anything like the show. It's just cheap jokes and not very good." And it's like, yeah, it's got that Tim Burton aesthetic, which is cool, except that doesn't exactly fit what the show was doing either. So all around just a big disappointment for me, but it was a kind of a well-known disappointment. It really had a reputation of being just a kind of a disaster of an attempt to memorialize this really famous and beloved cult show. And so I thought bring it up here, A, just so I could express my disappointment in it, and B, because I did feel like it was noteworthy enough as a failure to be talked about here. Even though I think commercially it did okay overseas, it really, wasn't good, and it didn't spawn the franchise that I think they intended to spawn. So yeah, this one not really worth your time. I wouldn't bother with it, but go ahead and make up your own mind and let me know in the comments below what you think of it, because for me, Dark Shadows, massive disappointment. The next TV adaptation we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Tales from the Dark Side. Tales from the Dark Side came out in 1990 and is directed by John Harrison, who is a colleague or a collaborator with George A. Romero. He's worked with him on a number of projects, and he was slated to direct this one here. And George Romero was a producer on this. And it's based on a 1980 show of the same name, Tales from the Dark Side. And it was an anthology show, much along the likes of like Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, things like that. And so you get an idea of what it's supposed to be like, and what it's supposedly trying to do, and the blueprint that they're basically following. So if you haven't seen it before, specifically, the movie is about a boy who's been kidnapped by a witch, and she's going to cook him for a dinner party. And while she's getting her prep work done, she's given him a book of scary, spooky stories to read, and he's sharing these stories with her to try to distract her and keep her occupied so she doesn't cook him. And then there's three various stories, and they are based on different, existing works, and they are macabre and strange. And I'll go ahead and stop there, so I'm not spoiling any of the specifics of the show for or the movie for you. But the movie has that same anthology feel. It is basically an anthology with a wraparound of this boy telling the stories from the book. And it's a perfectly serviceable, fine wraparound compared to some of the things I've seen recently in the VHS series. This is a much better, simple wraparound to feed you the stories. And it's fine. It's fun. And the stories themselves are they're the kind of same vein that you expect from a Tales from the Crypt type story, right? They're these stories that have, a bit of a creepy factor to them, and maybe a little bit of, a twist to them or something like that. But they don't necessarily have the same kind of stinging irony that other anthology shows or movies would have. Things like Tales from the Crypt, or even movies like Cat's Eye or Creepshow. And that's interesting because Creepshow is really what we should be thinking about here. Creepshow is a movie that was directed by George Romero and it was based on Stephen King's works, and George Romero did the sequel to it too. And those movies are great. We've talked about them here on the channel. I love me some Creepshow. I love Creepshow too. This was supposedly kind of what should have been Creepshow 3 instead of what actually we got for Creepshow 3. It really would have been this, but for reasons, it didn't work out. George Romero left that franchise and wound up making this instead. And I don't feel that this would have really meshed as well with the Creepshow movies because I feel like the tone is slightly softer. It's not quite the same, again, like that biting, ironic twist ending to the stories that you got in the Creepshow vignettes. So I don't know. It would have been better than what we got for Creepshow 3. I'll give you that. But I don't know how well it would have slid into that Creepshow series. And I think it's perfectly fine here on its own. Now, one of the strengths of this, besides the fact that it's got Romero and John Harrison, who again worked on Creepshow and a couple of the other things, is that it's got a really strong cast. This is a kind of a refrain you're going to hear a couple times in this video. The cast is strong. It's got Julianne Moore, got Christian Slater, Steve Buscemi, it's got William Hickey, James Remar, Gray Don Chong, Debbie Harry. Like, there's some really strong actors in this movie, and they're not bad at all. Like, again, this is all kind of what you expect from a anthology horror show in movie form. It is on par with a lot of these other movies, and I like those kind of movies. I think that they've done a fun job here. Again, I think that the wraparound story with Debbie Harry as the witch is fun. It's good. It's fine. It's not revelatory, but it's good. It's getting the job done. And then there's some fun things in the vignettes. You've got the one about the killer cat, and you're seeing things from the cat's POV. I love that. That's right up my alley, right? A cat killing people, I'm on board with that. I'm down for that. You've got the mummy that comes out pretty good design on that mummy. It looks pretty good. Again, this movie is not super high budget and it kind of feels a little bit like a television show because it is essentially a television show, but it looks good. It looks good. There's some gore in this movie that is surprisingly effective. It really looks surprisingly good. I I think that if you were a fan of the show, you'd be pretty pleased with what they did to step it up in the movie. Now, I did not grow up watching this show, and I didn't come to this movie till later after the fact. So this one kind of just passed me by. But I'm glad I found it because I do like these kind of movies. And like I said, is it quite as good as like Tales from the Crypt, Creep Show? Maybe not. I'd probably push the button on those a little bit more. And those have more of a reputation than this one admittedly does. But it does have a cult following for a reason because it's solid. It's fun. If you like Creep Show, if you like Tales from the Crypt, you're going to like this movie. Again, the casting is good. The direction is solid. The pacing is good. They don't do too many stories. And, it's like every time we look at an anthology movie, there's always like one obvious clunker. I don't really feel that's the case here because there's only three plus the wraparound. And I think it works out pretty good. I think that the stories are all solid to good and they kind of escalate in terms of interesting to me. I thought that they got better as they went along. So it ends on a higher note. I think that this one is maybe getting less love than it deserves. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to bring it up here because I do think it's good. I do enjoy this one. It's not my favorite. Like I said, I do like Creepshow better. I do like Tales from the Crypt better. But if you like those movies, you're gonna like this movie too. And they all owe, a big debt to Twilight Zone, which to me is the OG. So I think that if you like Twilight Zone, you're gonna like this movie. It's an easy sell, and none of the things overstay their welcome. None of the stories overstay their welcome. Solid movie, a lot of fun for me, and probably a lot of fun for you. So if you haven't seen it, give it a try and let me know what you think. And the last TV adaptation we're looking at today, the postgraduate level selection, is The Addams Family. The Addams Family came out in 1991 and was directed by director Barry Sonnenfeld, who's pretty well known. But this was his first feature film. I think he was a cinematographer before this, and he's making his feature debut in this movie. And it's based on a 1960s TV show of the same name, that was also based on a cartoon of the same name by Charles Adam about this kooky family. And it's a show that I liked, and it's a movie that I like. So let's get into it. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about this strange, kooky family that's kind of macabre and weird that live in the normal world, and everybody thinks they're strange. But they're very wealthy and kind of eccentric, and people somewhat tolerate them. And then there's this plot about their long lost brother coming back to reclaim his fortune, although it seems to be some sort of scam being perpetrated by these scammers, these con artists. And the family has to figure out whether or not this is really their true brother coming back or if it is indeed something more nefarious going on. And of course, hijinks abound. We're stopping there so as to not spoil the movie for you. And this movie got the memo. Unlike Dark Shadows, and unlike a lot of the movies I mentioned earlier on, this movie understood the tone of the original show and then matched that. It wasn't trying to parody it and say how campy it was, because the show was already kind of campy, but it would try very hard to be faithful to the show, both in tone and in look, and also in casting, frankly, because one of the strengths of this movie is its cast. It's got Angelica Houston, Raul Julia. Oh, he's so good in this movie. Christina Ricci, Carol Strucken from Twin Peaks. I love my Twin Peaks. Christopher Lloyd. It's just so many pitch perfect cast actors playing iconic roles from this cult TV show that is pretty beloved and has only grown in popularity since this movie. This movie really did respark interest in that show, which I did grow up watching as a child. I wasn't as big as a fan as of the Addams Family as I was of the Munsters. Very similar concepts. More on that in a minute. But I did like the Addams Family growing up, and this movie really did manage to capture that spirit and be true to that goofy show that they were basing this on. Like this, the idea of these really strange people in this family who are obsessed with macabre things, and they see nothing wrong with it and are actually kind of like they think everybody else is strange. The movie nailed that. And the aesthetic looked good. Like everything that Tim Burton was trying to do in Dark Shadows that just wound up not translating from the TV show. they did right here. Barry Sonnenfeld really had the look of this movie, even though it's in color. In the original show is in black and white. It felt right. It looked right. The characters looked right. The sets looked right. Everything fit to a very familiar way. So if you liked the show, you felt like you were in the right place here. And everybody is doing their job great. Unlike Dark Shadows, where I feel like they're just kind of wasting the cast, this movie, everybody's bringing their A game. They really are bringing these characters to life. They are being very true to those performances in the show, but also giving them their own spin. Raul Julia as Gomez Adams is a legend. It's fantastic. But Christina Ricci steals the show. Every time she's on screen, she's stealing the show as Wednesday Adams. And if you're familiar with the show Wednesday that's on TV now on Netflix, you are aware of the influence of this performance by Christina Ricci and how much 20 some odd years later, 30 years later, it still resonates. It still is making an impact. It's a very influential movie in that regard. Like the franchise for this movie, for this series, is strong. They made a sequel to this and Family Value, which is actually pretty good. It's for a sequel pretty almost on par with the original. I'd say maybe some people would argue it's better than the original. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's good. They made a third one, different cast. I think it was made for TV. No, that's not really it. And I know they've done some animated movies. I haven't had a chance to see those yet, but I've heard really good things about the animated movies too. And then, of course, there's the Wednesday TV show, which is wildly popular, also very good. And interestingly, done by Tim Burton. And he's got it right this time. So it again makes me so mad about what could have been for Dark Shadows. I'm still mad about it. I'm still mad about it. Anyways, Adam's Family, they got it right. They understood the assignment, and everybody working on this got it. And it's funny because from when I do the research on it, apparently the studio didn't have a lot of faith in it, and there was like a change and I think there was a change in studio and stuff like that. It was going over budget, and it wound up being a massive hit that has spawned this massive franchise, and to its benefit because the movie tone is right, the aesthetic is right, the acting is right. The plot is admittedly a little convoluted, like this whole thing, especially the ending of it, which is kind of this weird twist ending thing that I don't love. I think it's a little pat, but apparently everybody else did like it. I don't know, but I think that the plot's a little bit convoluted, a little bit much. But that's not really what you're here for. You're here for the jokes, and the jokes land. The jokes work. They're funny. They are into the spirit of the show. They are true to the characters, and then the modern day look of it, like the way Thing looks, in terms of CGI instead of like just a puppet coming through a box or whatever, looks really really good. The digital or technological advancements that just enhance the effects of the movie wound up working really really well. Everything about this movie is just how a TV adaptation should be. This is how it should be done in terms of understanding the source material, being very faithful to it, but also just giving it like a refresh and an update so that it's a little bit more modern. And pretty much everything about it works except for MC Hammer. They got MC Hammer to do the theme song, the Adams, I forget what it's called, Adams Groove, and it's terrible. It's bad. It's a terrible song. It doesn't fit the movie at all. They've clearly shoehorned it in to make it work, and it does not work. But it does get in your head, man. It is an earworm, and it was a hit. So, who am I to say? Like they knew what they were doing, I guess. But that part feels almost anachronistic now because it sticks out like a sore thumb, whereas the movie has otherwise held up remarkably well. So I'm a big fan of this movie being a kind of like I said, the blueprint for TV adaptations, especially for horror TV. And definitely, if you haven't seen it, check it out. Get on the bandwagon. What this whole Adams Family thing is about that people love so much because it's generational. And it's multi generational now, and it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. So pay the respect. Watch the original movie. Most of you probably have, but if you haven't and you check it out for the first time, let me know what you think. And if it's just super weird and it's not your bag, it might be odd because if you're not familiar with the show, you might just be like, "What the hell is this about?" Give it a chance, anyways. It's really, really good. So that's going to do it for our look at horror movies that are adapting horror television shows. And like I said, there's some mixed bag there, but I do think there's a few more that we need to talk about that are also, frankly, a mixed bag. But we kind of have to talk about them. I feel like so. Well, let's just go ahead and talk about them. The first extra credit we're going to talk about is the Munsters. And The Munsters came out in 2022 and was directed by polarizing horror director Rob Zombie, who is allegedly a big fan of the original 60s TV show of the same name that this movie is based on, like The Addams Family, a sitcom about a out of place, scary, creepy family that's living in the normal world. And while they're similar TV shows, they are dissimilar movies. But we're going to get into that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is actually an origin story to the television show, showing how Herman Munster and Lily, his future wife, met and how they started their family and moved to suburbia after getting having a hard time getting swindled in their Transylvanian home and having to move to the suburbs to start their lives all over again. And all of the various hijinks that were involved in them being able to get together and get married and start their lives as a new family. But I'm going to go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. But here's the thing, the movie is a bit hard to follow. I watched this movie even after hearing the very negative reviews about this. The movie, like, not only got mediocre or bad critical reviews, but fan response was horrendously bad. And I had several friends who watched it and warned me, just saying it's terrible, don't see it. So I didn't see it right away. But I also thought a lot of these same friends don't really love Rob Zombie, so I know that, like, a lot of people who don't feel Rob Zombie, and I actually have liked his movies for the most part. So I feel like maybe I'm not going to have that same visceral reaction they had. I was wrong. The movie is shockingly bad. It's just, it's a slog to get through. It's a tough watch, in part because it's almost 2 hours long. So you feel it. You feel that pain. It's a mess of a plot. Like, I did not know what the hell was going on through most of the movie. It took me a while to realize that it was actually an origin story. If they said it early on, I missed it, but I couldn't figure out what was going on and why we weren't where we were supposed to be. And it takes over an hour to get to them being in the neighborhood where they are, and the whole fish out of water kind of strange culture shock differences between them and the regular world doesn't come up for almost like about over an hour. And before that, they're in Transylvania with other creepy monster thingies, and that's just not interesting. That's missing the point of the show, which was to show this distinction between their creepy but loving family and everybody's reaction to them because they're so scary looking because they're monsters. And this movie, everybody's a monster for the vast majority of the movie, misses the point entirely. And again, Rob Zombie, supposedly a big fan of the show, missed that point. Now, some of this is not Rob Zombie's fault. Like, the movie should have been in black and white, like the TV show. But instead, the studio, I guess, insisted that it be in color. So Zombie made it really garishly kind of saturated and bright, and it just looks strange. It looks a little bit like Beetlejuice, but Beetlejuice that worked. And in this, it feels antithetical to the spirit of the show. It doesn't have that same kind of gothic look to it. It just looks bright and garish, and that whole world in Transylvania just looks very bizarre and strange and unappealing. And we saw with Addams Family that you can make a movie that was out of a black and white TV show into a color movie and do it in a way that honors the aesthetic. This did not do that at all, but it would have helped to have it in black and white. It would have. But the biggest thing for me is that the jokes are horrible. They just don't land. Unlike Addams Family, where the jokes are hitting, they're good. Here, the jokes are terrible. Like, Rob Zombie doesn't have a sense of humor. And for people who dislike Rob Zombie because they don't like that he's basically obsessed with, like, hillbilly, vulgar, like, white trash people, that's not here in this movie. But it didn't help. It's like Rob does not know how to make a comedy at all. He doesn't get this show at all. And of course, he puts his wife Sherry Moon Zombie in here, and everybody complains that he puts his wife and everything. I'm not one of those people because I think she can be very passable and sometimes even kind of good. I actually liked her in, like, say, Lords of Salem, for example. But in this movie, she is woefully miscast. But everybody is woefully miscast. The guy playing Herman, the guy playing Grandpa, they're all woefully miscast. Nobody is good in this movie. Nobody is good, and the jokes are terrible. They're grown with. I didn't laugh once. I didn't even smile once in this movie. It's just horrible. It's horribly miscast. It's horribly written. It's horribly directed. It's a slog. It's so slow. It's boring. It's a boring movie. The plot's a bit of a mess. You don't care anyways because you're just waiting for something to happen that's interesting or entertaining or fun. The only thing that's entertaining about this movie is how much it misses the mark. How much of a disaster it actually is. And that's why we're talking about it, because it had the visceral reaction from fans. People really hated this movie. And I feel almost bad for Zombie because I do think if he really is a true fan of the show, and I believe that he is, why wouldn't I believe he is? he must have been shocked to see how poorly received this was. It's like he tried to do something kind of different or fresh with it, and that was a bad idea. But what he did wasn't even really different or fresh. It was just boring. It was just painful. I had a hard time getting through this movie, and I did not watch it again for this review. I depended on what I remember because it was bad. It was bad. And again, I like the Munsters better than the Addams Family from the TV show. I used to watch both as a kid, and I preferred the Munsters. I just thought they had a certain charm to them that just appealed to me more than the Addams Family. But that's the opposite of that is true here. The Addams Family movie is much more charming and cute, and this movie is just painfully unfunny. Painfully unfunny. It's trying so hard to be interesting visually and narratively, and it just fails on every level. It's an awful movie. I'm telling you right now, don't watch it. Like even if you hate Rob Zombie and you want to kind of get the Schadenfreude of watching him fail, I don't think it's enough to make it worth spending an hour and 50 minutes of your time here. And if you like Rob Zombie, you're not going to like this because it's not like his other movies at all. Like he's got a certain aesthetic that's not here. He's got a certain vibe that's not here. He's got this propensity for violence. It's not here. This doesn't actually feel like a Rob Zombie movie. And if Sherry Moon Zombie wasn't in it, you'd probably never know that it was a Rob Zombie movie. So I really disliked this movie a lot, and I'm gonna just tell you guys, don't watch it. But I know some of you are gonna do it anyways. And most of you probably already have, so sorry, but that's that one. The next extra credit movie we're gonna talk about is Fantasy Island. Fantasy Island came out in 2020 and it was made by Blumhouse. It was a Blumhouse movie that we almost talked about this in my Blumhouse video, but I decided to hold on to it for here because it's based on a 1970s show of the same name that is not actually a horror television show, but they made a kind of a horror movie out of it. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but it really was kind of a twist on the formula for the TV show to make the movie that they made, and it didn't go well, but I kind of don't care. We're going to get into all this in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie's premise is based on this island that people get invited to that will basically show you or let you experience like your deepest fantasies and kind of let you re-experience certain things in your life or experience new things in your life that you've always wanted. But of course, there is a dark underside to this, and there's a mystery on this island about why the people who've been chosen were chosen. And there is some things that can go not so well as the nefarious plots get unraveled. And we will just go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. In this movie, the spoiler, I don't know. I feel like this movie might be a little bit on the predictable side, frankly. It's also kind of a bit of a mess of a movie because there is a lot of disparate plot going on here. It's not even just the plot, it's that the movie has it's like a couple of different movies in one, not like an anthology, but almost like an anthology. But it's like as the movie's exploring these different characters and their different fantasies are being played out on the island, the tone of the movie shifts to match that particular fantasy. So the movie feels kind of all over the place, and it really doesn't always feel like a horror movie. Now, like I said, the original show, which you may not be familiar with, but I remember watching it as a kid. I did not particularly care for it as a kid. I think my mom liked to watch it, but it was a TV show that was kind of more cutesy drama type thing, a light drama romance type show, kind of like Love Boat, frankly, where all these things would happen and people get together and people find like happy endings and stuff like that. And it definitely wasn't a horror show, and they've made a horror aspect to this movie. It's not the whole movie. Like there are other parts of the movie that are a little bit more true to the show, but for the most part, they are really just taking the concept of the show and some homages of the show, and then they're throwing everything else out the window and trying to make a standard horror movie out of it. And I'm kind of here for that because I don't like the show. So I thought that's a fresh take. So I was actually excited to see this movie. I saw it in theaters, and it's true they did make a horror aspect to it, but it's kind of a mess of a movie, and I liked it anyways, and I might be the only person in the world who likes this movie. I don't know. I don't think a lot of people really enjoy this movie very much or downright hate it. I don't know if anybody really hates it because I don't know if there's anything worth hating about the movie, frankly. I don't think it matters enough, but it's not a good movie. And I freely admit that it's not a good movie. But there's two things about this movie that really kind of brought it home for me. The first one is the cast. The cast, which has Lucy Hale and Jimmy O Yang and Ryan Hansen, Maggie Q, Michael Pena. It's a really surprisingly strong cast. Again, budget movie, Blumhouse, right? They don't have big budgets. And none of these guys are like huge stars or anything like that. But they got a cast of recognizable names that I enjoy. for the most part, everybody in this movie is somebody that I actually like and I liked before this movie. So I had some goodwill towards them. Lucy Hale in particular, I'm a big fan. You know me, I love me some Pretty Little Liars. I've talked about it before. And so I'm very partial to Pretty Little Liars actors, Lucy Hale being my favorite of them. So Lucy Hale alone was enough for me to see the movie. And she carries this movie for me in a large part. Even though nobody in this movie is particularly great, and in some cases feel very miscast. Looking at you, Michael Pena. Michael Pena looks not like the part. He's supposed to be like Ricardo Montalban from the original show. He's no Ricardo Montalban, and he's playing it in such a different way that it's kind of trying to, I guess, enhance the horror aspect of this, but it's just not the character anymore. It's not really what we are expecting if you are familiar with the show. And it's a different take, so I'm rolling with that, but it's not a particularly good one. And the other actors, they're just not given enough to do that's interesting. They're not really doing a good job because there's not much material to work with. And so be it. That is what it is. But the idea of making the show into a horror movie depends on it having a bit of a tension or kind of a mood to it that the movie doesn't consistently do, because these other characters, Ryan Hansen and Maggie Hughes, they're in their other stories that are not as scary as the story that Lucy Hale is in. And so it's not till they start to bleed together that you really start to get a feel of the horror aspect of it. And that's what I wanted. That's what I came here for. And so I'm happy when I'm getting the horror aspects of it. And the second thing about this movie that I like is like how gleefully off the rails it goes when it tries to really bring everything together and commit to the horror aspect of this. It goes so off the rails. I almost put this in the so bad it's good category originally, because it is so bad that it's good, to me at least. I might be in the minority on this one, I admit, but this movie goes so wrongfully off the rails, and it cheats to get there. You know, we've talked about this before in movies like, say, High Tension, where in order to preserve the surprise, they do something to show you something that doesn't make sense narratively, where a person is basically pretending for the sake of the audience, or lying for the sake of the audience. There's nobody else to be performing for. It's just us watching them in a private moment, but they're still acting like, I think the movie Frozen does this too, the Disney movie Frozen does this too, where you've got a villain who's acting a certain way and they're not, there's nobody to be acting for. And so the movie cheats. The movie cheats in order to accomplish its goal. That's a big no-no, and it's a big thing that I can get really down on, but I just thought it was hilarious. The movie goes so bad and so gleefully off the rails in a way that I thought was hysterical, and I was just having a good time. And then the cherry on top is the very end, where they give you a little surprise, a nod or homage to the show that feels unnecessary, forced in, and maybe a little bit racist. Maybe, I don't know, but it's awful. It's awful in the best possible way. I came out of Fantasy Island just laughing, having a great time, thinking it was so stupid, and then nobody else was laughing. Everybody was just talking about how bad it was. And I was like, but you weren't having fun? And so I guess I'm in the minority on this one, but I was good. I wanted to find a place to talk about it somewhere. So when I was doing the TV adaptation, like, that's the place to talk about it, because it is a TV adaptation, and one that was ambitious in trying to do a different spin on the show, and give us something a little bit darker and a little bit more, at least to me, interesting, and failed miserably and spectacularly in a way that I find to be very fun and very funny. So I love it. I think it's a good time. Your mileage may vary, so let me know what you think in the comments below. And the last extra credit movie we're going to talk about today is Black Mirror Bandersnatch. Bandersnatch came out in 2018 and is based on the Black Mirror television series on Netflix, but it's not so much of a adaptation of that show as it is kind of a continuation or an entry, a movie entry in that show. So it's a little bit of bending the rules here, and that is kind of why I didn't put it in the syllabus proper, and I'm putting it as extra credit, because otherwise I love me some Bandersnatch. I love some Black Mirror, and I love Bandersnatch, and I really love what they did with it. So let's get into that. If you haven't seen it before, Bandersnatch is a interactive choose your own adventure style movie that is about a video game developer in the 1980s who is working on a interactive choose your own adventure style video game based on a book that's a choose your own adventure style book. And the writer of the book had gone crazy, and now this game developer is starting to lose his mind as he works on this video game. Meanwhile, us as the viewer get to choose what he does and doesn't do at various points in the movie. And I'll stop there so as to not spoil it too much, but that's the big hook on this movie is its interactivity. While you're watching this movie on Netflix, the the movie will stop periodically and you will choose with your remote control what happens next, what cereal the guy chooses, what type of music the guy listens to. You'll make choices to him that at first seem kind of benign or basic, and then as the movie goes on, get more and more consequential, and the choices you make take you down a certain path. And if you were to rewatch the movie and make different choices, you will get a different experience. That is the fun of the movie. And this is not the first time that this kind of thing's been done before. This kind of technology and this kind of concept has been done before, but I'd say this is one of the more noteworthy and mainstream examples of this technology being used and this concept being used. And it's a big selling point for the movie and why it got so much hype and notoriety. It's a gimmick, but it's a fun gimmick and a fresh take on the Black Mirror TV show, which is a TV show. It's an anthology TV show where every episode is its own little story, but they're all having to do with like technological issues or advancements, near future tech, things like that, and all the kind of dark and ironic things that can happen from that tech. Think of it like a technology based modern version of the Twilight Zone. I love it. I think it's great. And this movie was like the next step of that by literally using the technology of the interactive watching experience on streaming as a point in the movie. And that's where the real strength of this movie comes from me is the meta aspect of this. You've got a guy in the mid 80s who is developing a game that's a choose your own adventure game and he's losing his mind because he feels like he's being controlled, like he's not in control of his own life and that choices are being made for him, which is true because we as the viewer are making those choices for him and he starts to become aware of that. And this concept of being on a Netflix streaming service that is a choose your own adventure movie, it's great stuff. I love that meta aspect of it, and I love that this movie is dealing with the idea of alternate realities, i.e., our reality, for example, or the different paths that he takes depending on which decisions get made and how that influences him. There's a time travel aspect to this movie that is really fun depending on which way you go, and I love it. This is stuff that's right up my alley. I love this time wonkiness stuff, these multiple dimension stuff. This is stuff I really, really love. And they tying this together with the format so that it's no longer just a gimmick, a choose your own adventure gimmick, but is actually a integral part of the story of the movie. The fact that you are changing things, that you are choosing these things and making the directing the story in which way it's going to go is a part, it's a plot point of the movie is genius. I love it. I grew up reading those choose your own adventure books as a kid, and I was really into them. And I couldn't help myself. I'd go back and reread them and try to like get the different endings and stuff like that. And that's what this movie invites for you to do too. There's somewhere between 5 and 10 endings, depending on who you look at or who you talk to on this. And I don't think I've watched all of them, but I have watched several of them, and I've gone on YouTube to kind of see people watch other ones too. And it's fun. It's fun that you can get a different experience every time. And then the more times you spend playing with this movie and watching it, the more you're going to get out of it because you'll see how intricately plotted and planned out it is, and how these things work together, and how it warrants multiple viewings with different choices and rewards you for that. It also has a lot of callbacks and ties to the Black Mirror show. Like I said, this is not an adaptation so much as it's like a continuation of this. A lot of the episodes are set in the same universe, and this one is too. And it has some fun Easter eggs on that, but it also kind of relies a little bit on you having seen the show or being familiar with some of the show. Not so much so that if you didn't, you couldn't follow it, but you are definitely rewarded by that. You are definitely going to have a better, richer experience if you're familiar with the show as well. Everybody in the show is doing really good work. Noteworthy is Will Poulter in there as a rival video game developer who is somewhat kind of aware of what's going on. He seems to have more knowledge about how this is all working in the ultimate dimensions and stuff like that. He seems to know more than he's letting on, and he's at times charming and creepy at the same time. He gives a really wonderful performance here. He's always pretty much a standout. Like he gives always noteworthy performances. He's pretty noteworthy here, and he stood out to me. But the entire cast is solid. But it's really the filmmaking. It's really the plotting of this out, the writing of this that is the star here, showing up in a really fun way, making this a fun watch that is interactive, that you feel like you're a part of, you're in it, to a point where it can make you feel a little dirty because you're being asked certain things that could lead to characters dying and stuff like that. That is pretty pretty dark, and it's on par. It's on brand for Black Mirror. Again, very true to the show because it basically is a continuation of the show, and it can make you feel a little icky. So some people might not quite have the stomach for that, but for the most part, I think you're just going to find it fun if you've never seen it before. If you have the opportunity to watch it on Netflix, where you can do the interactive stuff with it, highly recommend it because it's just an experience to be a part of the story in a way that is fun and interesting and really well thought out and mapped out so that it's not just a gimmick where you're picking a choose your own adventure, but you're actually part of the story in a way that is fascinating and feels very fresh and original. So while this might not be the first time that they use this technology, and I really did think it'd kind of catch on more, but I think it's hard to make it feel this integrated where your experience is part of the movie as well. I think that was really clever, and it's like I said, I would have definitely put this on syllabus, but for the fact that it didn't really feel like a true adaptation. So I hedged a little bit and just threw it in here extra credit, but I love it. I think it's great, and if you haven't seen it and you get a chance to play it, like a game, I absolutely think you should do that. So that's going to be it for our exploration into TV adaptations. Like I warned you, it's a mixed bag here. There's some really good stuff and there's some not so good stuff, and some of it's not worth your time. And I'll be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below because maybe some of the things I think are bad you don't think are so bad, and maybe some of the things I think are good you don't think are quite so good. So by all means, share that in the comments below, and we'll take a look at it for sure and have a discussion about it. But now we're going to take a look at it and have a discussion about a horror trivia pursuit card. It's that time where I'm going to answer a question live on camera, and today let's go with the psychological category because I just talked about Bandersnatch, which is a very much a psychological horror movie, and I really like it. So we're gonna go with the psychological category, and here's the question: what is the amount of money Marion Crane steals at the beginning of 1960's Psycho? And I am pretty sure, like 98% sure, that I know the answer to this question. I love me some Psycho. We've talked about it quite a bit. Oh, hello there. My cat decided that he wants to be on the video today too, and I'm not cutting him. You're not getting cut. You knew exactly the time to show up here. You're not getting cut because I'm not cutting. I want people to know that I'm not cheating here. So I hope you can help me answer this question, buddy. Anyways, Psycho. I love Psycho. I know it very well. Stop. That's not yours. That's he's trying to see the answer. No. Stop it. Stop it. It's not yours. It's not yours. So yeah, it's a great movie, and I've seen it enough times and talked about it enough times that I remember details like this. And in particular, I remember it because when Gus Van Sant made his version of it, it was a shot-for-shot remake. But one of the few details that he changed, one of the few details that he changed was the amount of the money to update it for modern times because it was a modern day telling of the movie. And so I remember thinking that was noteworthy then. So that's why I remember this. So I'm, like I said, 98% sure I know it, but I'm prattling on mostly because this cat is being annoying, but also to give you some time to answer it. So you lock in your answer. I'm going to go ahead and turn the card over, or I'm not going to turn, I'm going to give my answer, and I turn over the card and check. My answer, of course, is $40,000. $40,000 because $40,000 in 1960 was a hell of a lot of money then. And in the Gus Van Sant movie, they moved it up to $400,000, and which gives you a little bit of an idea of like what kind of money she was looking at. Because I think people look back at this movie and watch it today and think 40 grand is not that much money for her to take the risks that she takes. But in this movie, or at that time period, in this movie, it was potentially life-changing money, just like 400 grand would be now. So it makes more sense when you understand that conversion of it. But let's just double check the card, make sure I'm right. And $40,000 right there, the number $40,000. Thank you, Lorenzo, for holding on to that card. So yeah, this one was a particularly easy one for me because I know Psycho so well, but maybe for some of you it wasn't. So how much did you guess? What was your thought on this? Let me know in the comments below what your guess was on this one because I'd be interested in knowing. But let me know. I love wrong answers, especially if they're funny. But I don't know if that's funny a number amount is. So I don't know. But let me know what your answers were. Let me know what you think of these TV adaptations. Let me know if you can think of other ones that you think should have been talked about. I may have already talked about them on the video before, but we can talk about all that in the comments below, including any recommendations you have for movies that I haven't seen before. You know I like to watch those and let you know what I think of them in the other videos. And until we get to one of those videos next week, or yeah, probably next week, I'm just going to say, class dismissed.